My name is Harper Ellis, and I was 26 the week my mother and my younger sister decided my career was nothing more than a free closet for them to raid. They waited until I was across the country, sitting in a glass boardroom in New York City, to break into my private design studio and steal my entire debut bridal collection. My sister, Serena, would later stand in front of a mirror, twirling in a custom silk organza gown she had not paid for and did not earn, believing she had secured the perfect aesthetic for her high society wedding. My mother would later tell my aunt that she only borrowed the garments because family comes first, and that I was being incredibly selfish for wanting to keep a few pieces of fabric to myself. They had absolutely no idea that when they walked out of my studio with those garment bags, they hadn't just stolen a few pieces of fabric. They had stolen the exclusive, fiercely protected intellectual property of a multi-million-dollar global luxury fashion house. And the cease and desist letter I handed them on the morning of the wedding didn't come from me. It came from a team of corporate litigators who do not care about our family tree. People who exist outside of the high fashion industry fundamentally misunderstand what bespoke garment construction actually is. They think it is just cutting shapes out of pretty material and running it through a sewing machine. They think it is a hobby. It isn't. High fashion is wearable architecture. It is the mastery of tension, gravity, and geometry. A properly constructed couture bodice requires hand-stitched horsehair braid, steel boning, and precise bias cuts that defy the natural drape of the silk. You are engineering a structure that must move fluidly while holding a rigid, flawless shape. I built my entire life around that exact discipline. I believed in strong seams. I believed in measuring a foundation twice before you make the final cut. Unfortunately, I was born into a family that treated relationships like cheap, fast fashion, held together by fragile synthetic threads, completely reliant on appearances, and perfectly willing to discard you the moment you stopped serving their aesthetic. In my family, there was my sister Serena, and there was me. Serena was 24, blindingly beautiful in a conventional, polished way, and entirely consumed by how her life translated to her social media followers. My mother, Evelyn, operated as Serena's personal manager, publicist, and primary enabler. Evelyn measured her own worth by Serena's social climbing. To my mother and sister, my career was an anomaly they vaguely tolerated. I didn't go to normal parties. I went to textile mills. I didn't care about their country club luncheons. I cared about securing a specific weight of French Chantilly lace. I had spent 4 years at Parsons School of Design, followed by a grueling 3-year apprenticeship under a master tailor in Milan, living on espresso and sheer willpower. By the time I was 26, I had opened my own independent atelier in an industrial loft downtown. I wasn't doing alterations or making prom dresses. I was designing highly conceptual avant-garde bridal wear. Evelyn, however, refused to acknowledge the distinction. To her, I was just a seamstress. "Harper, darling," my mother would say, dropping off a pair of designer slacks at my loft that she had bought off the rack. "Be a dear and take the hem up on these by an inch. I'm going to a charity gala tonight. It should only take you 5 minutes. You're so handy with a needle." I rarely fought back. Arguing with Evelyn was like trying to stitch water. It was an exercise in futility that only left you exhausted. I would hem her pants, hand them back, and return to my drafting table. I didn't need Evelyn to understand my value, because the global fashion industry was already beginning to recognize it. 6 months before Serena's wedding, my life changed forever. I had submitted a digital portfolio of my upcoming debut collection to Maison Villette, one of the most prestigious, exclusive luxury bridal houses in Paris and New York. Maison Villette did not buy dresses. They bought prodigies. They acquired independent designers, absorbed their collections under the Villette umbrella, and launched them globally. To my absolute shock, the creative director of Maison Villette flew to my city, walked into my dusty industrial loft, and looked at my prototypes. He didn't just offer me a job, he offered me a buyout. Maison Villette proposed to purchase the exclusive rights to my entire 7-piece debut collection. This included one breathtaking, intricately draped bridal gown and 6 distinct architectural bridesmaid and evening gowns. The contract was massive. It included a 6-figure upfront licensing fee, a position as an associate creative director in their New York office, and royalties on every dress produced from my patterns. But a contract with a luxury fashion house comes with absolute, ironclad corporate conditions. The moment I signed the preliminary letter of intent, those 7 dresses ceased to belong to me. They became the intellectual and physical property of Maison Villette Holdings LLC. I was required to sign a draconian non-disclosure agreement. The dresses were not allowed to be photographed, worn, or seen by the public until Maison Villette's official runway launch during New York Bridal Fashion Week, which was scheduled for the upcoming September. If the designs were leaked, photographed, or worn prior to the launch, the contract would be rendered null and void, and I would be personally liable for millions in breach of contract penalties. The 7 prototypes hung in the back of my studio, encased in opaque black garment bags, secured behind a heavy biometric lock on my stockroom door. They were my golden ticket. They were my entire future. While I was quietly navigating international corporate law, my sister Serena was planning a wedding. Serena had managed to get engaged to a man named Preston, a junior wealth manager whose family had old money and very high expectations. Serena was determined to throw a wedding that looked like a royal coronation. Evelyn was in her absolute element, booking a historic mansion venue, hiring a 10-piece orchestra, and securing imported orchids. But Serena and Evelyn had a fatal flaw. They were obsessed with the facade of wealth, but they lacked the liquid cash to sustain it. By month 4 of the wedding planning, they had blown their entire massive budget on the venue, the catering, and the flowers. They had nothing left for the wardrobe. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the storm finally rolled into my studio. I was at my drafting table, reviewing the final CAD files for Maison Villette, when the heavy loft door swung open. Evelyn and Serena marched in, carrying iced coffees and wearing the synchronized predatory smiles they always wore when they were about to ask for something unreasonable. "Harper!" Evelyn sang out, waving her hand to dismiss the cloud of chalk dust in the air. "We have the most brilliant idea." I didn't stop drafting. "I'm on a deadline, Mom. What is it?" Serena leaned against my cutting table, casually tracing her perfectly manicured finger over a spool of silk thread. "So, Preston's mother is being an absolute nightmare about the bridal party aesthetics. She wants everything to be custom, but the bridal boutiques are quoting us completely insane prices for custom work, and the wedding is only 2 months away." "That is the standard timeline and pricing for custom bridal," I said evenly, keeping my eyes on my blueprints. "Well, yes, for strangers," Evelyn said, stepping closer. But then I remembered. My brilliant daughter has an entire studio full of sewing machines. Serena needs her bridal gown, Harper. And she has 6 bridesmaids. We want you to design and construct the entire wedding wardrobe. It will be your gift to the couple. It's the perfect solution. I stopped drawing. I set my pencil down and looked at the two of them. To design, source, fit, and construct one bespoke bridal gown and 6 custom bridesmaid dresses takes approximately 800 hours of skilled manual labor. It requires thousands of dollars in raw silk, lace, and structural materials. They were asking me to halt my entire life, fund their wardrobe out of my own pocket, and do it all for free, simply because they had mismanaged their flower budget. "No," I said. It was a single, flat syllable. Serena's smile vanished. "Excuse me? What do you mean, no? I'm your sister." "I mean no, Serena," I replied calmly. "I am currently executing a massive corporate contract. I work 80 hours a week. I do not have the time, the bandwidth, or the materials to build 7 custom gowns from scratch in 8 weeks. Furthermore, my minimum commission for a bespoke bridal gown is $15,000. If you want my work, You can join my 2-year waitlist and pay the deposit." Evelyn gasped, clutching the pearls at her neck in an overt display of theatrical shock. "Harper Ellis, I cannot believe how selfish you are being. Your sister is marrying into the most prominent family in this city. This is her special day. You make clothes for a living. You have bolts of fabric just sitting right there." "Fabric is not a dress, Mom," I said, my voice hardening, "and my business is not a charity for your social climbing. You blew your budget on orchids. You can go buy dresses off the rack at a department store." The answer is no. The argument lasted for an hour. There were tears. There were guilt trips. Serena accused me of being jealous of her beauty and her fiancé. Evelyn accused me of destroying the family over my arrogant little hobby. I didn't yield. I didn't yell back. I simply walked over to the heavy loft door, held it open, and waited for them to leave. "You are going to regret this, Harper," Serena hissed, grabbing her designer bag. "You are supposed to be my sister, but you're just a bitter, lonely seamstress." They stormed out. I locked the door behind them. I assumed I had successfully defended my boundaries. I assumed that the word no was a definitive wall. I didn't realize that to my mother and sister my boundaries were just an inconvenience they planned to work around. 3 weeks later, the final paperwork for the Maison Villette acquisition was ready. I was required to fly to New York City for 48 hours to sit in their corporate boardroom, meet the executive board, and physically sign the massive stack of transfer documents and non-disclosure agreements. It was the climax of my entire career. Before I left, I secured my studio. I checked the heavy deadbolt on the front loft door. I verified the biometric lock on the back stockroom door, where the 7 black garment bags hung in pristine, climate-controlled silence. I did not, however, account for the building's property manager. My mother had known the property manager, an older man named Gary, for years. When I first rented the loft, Evelyn had co-signed the lease because my independent credit history hadn't been long enough to satisfy the commercial requirements. Gary knew my mother. Gary trusted my mother. While I was 30,000 feet in the air, flying toward New York, Evelyn drove to my building. She found Gary in the lobby. She put on her most charming, frantic maternal routine. She told him that there was a family emergency, that a pipe had burst in her house, and that I had told her she could store some antique furniture in my studio while I was out of town. She told him she had lost her spare key. Gary, entirely unsuspecting and legally blinded by the fact that Evelyn's name was technically still on the original guarantor paperwork, unlocked the front door of my loft for her. Evelyn and Serena didn't bring antique furniture. They brought determination and a profound, breathtaking sense of entitlement. When they found the back stockroom locked with a biometric scanner, they didn't stop. Serena, who had spent years watching me work in the studio, knew that the master override key for the electronic lock was kept in a small, hollowed-out tailoring book on my bookshelf for fire safety compliance. They bypassed the lock. They walked into my climate-controlled stockroom. They saw the 7 opaque black garment bags hanging on the stainless steel rack. They unzipped one. They saw the gleam of hand-draped silk organza, the meticulous French lace, the structural perfection of the Maison Villette debut collection. 1 bridal gown. 6 evening gowns in a stunning cohesive palette of deep emerald and slate gray. They didn't see intellectual property. They didn't see millions of dollars of corporate leverage. They saw free dresses. They saw the solution to their wedding budget crisis. They took all 7 bags, loaded them into Evelyn's SUV, and drove away. I returned from New York on a Thursday evening. I was exhausted, jet-lagged, but buzzing with a profound, foundational joy. The contracts were signed. The wire transfer for the 6-figure licensing fee was pending in my corporate account. I was officially an associate creative director for Maison Villette. I walked into my loft. I turned on the lights. Everything looked normal at first glance. My drafting table was undisturbed. The spools of thread were in their rightful places. But as I walked toward the back of the studio, I felt a sudden freezing drop in my stomach. The heavy steel door to the stockroom was ajar. I dropped my suitcase. I ran to the door and pulled it open. The climate-controlled room was completely, devastatingly empty. The stainless steel rack was bare. The 7 black garment bags were gone. For 10 seconds, I couldn't breathe. My brain immediately jumped to corporate espionage. I thought a rival fashion house had broken in. I thought I had been robbed by professional thieves who knew the street value of couture. I was hyperventilating, reaching for my phone to dial 911, my entire career flashing before my eyes as a burning, ruined wreckage. And then my eyes landed on the cutting table in the center of the room. Sitting directly on top of my fabric shears was a small embossed card. It was a piece of Serena's custom, expensive wedding stationery. I picked it up with shaking hands. Harper, the elegant, looping handwriting read, "Mom said you were hiding these in the back room just to be spiteful. They are absolutely perfect. The emerald green matches the orchids exactly. It was so incredibly selfish of you to pretend you didn't have time to make us dresses when these were just sitting here gathering dust. We are taking them for the wedding, see? Family always works things out. Love, Serena." I didn't scream. I didn't throw the card. The sheer, monumental ignorance of what they had just done hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just stolen dresses from their sister. They had broken into a commercial facility and stolen the physical assets and trade secrets of a global corporation, directly violating an international non-disclosure agreement. If Serena was photographed in that dress, if those bridesmaids walked down an aisle and those designs were posted on Instagram before the Paris runway launch, Maison Villette would cancel my contract immediately. They would sue me for breach of NDA. They would sue me for the licensing fee. I would be bankrupted, blacklisted, and destroyed before my career even started. I dialed my mother's number. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my voice, when she finally answered, was terrifyingly calm. "Mom," I said, "you broke into my studio." Evelyn laughed. It was a light, breezy, entirely unbothered laugh. "Oh, Harper, don't be so dramatic. I didn't break in. Gary let me in. We just came to borrow those gorgeous dresses you were hoarding. You were being so stubborn, darling, and Serena was so stressed." "Mom, you need to bring those garment bags back to my studio immediately," I said, gripping the edge of the cutting table so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You do not understand what you have taken. Those are not my dresses anymore." "Nonsense," Evelyn scoffed dismissively. "You made them. They are your clothes. And now they are Serena's clothes. Honestly, Harper, they fit the girls like a glove. It's like you made them for us. Serena looks like an absolute princess in the white one." "Evelyn, listen to me very carefully," I said, dropping the word mom entirely. "If Serena alters, wears, or photographs that dress, she is committing a crime. Those are corporate prototypes. They are protected under a federal intellectual property contract. You have committed grand larceny." "Stop trying to scare me with your legal mumbo-jumbo, Harper," my mother snapped, her tone instantly pivoting to irritation. "They are just pieces of fabric. You are just a seamstress. You can sit down at your little sewing machine and make 7 more by the time your little fashion show comes around. Serena's wedding is in 3 weeks. We are keeping the dresses. End of discussion." She hung up the phone. I stood in my empty stockroom, listening to the dial tone. If you are the kind of person who drives to your mother's house, bangs on the door, and physically wrestles the stolen items out of her hands, I understand you. I wanted to do that. I wanted to burn her house to the ground. But I didn't do that. Because I remembered a fundamental rule of couture tailoring. You do not force a seam that is bound to rip. You examine the tension, you locate the structural weakness, and you cut the thread where the fabric is weakest. My mother and sister thought they were stealing from a quiet, powerless seamstress who would eventually fold to keep the peace in the family. They thought the worst consequence they would face was me giving them the silent treatment at Thanksgiving. Here's what they didn't know. When you sign a contract with Maison Villette, you are assigned a dedicated corporate legal liaison. A pit bull in a tailored suit, whose entire job is to brutally enforce the intellectual property rights of the fashion house against counterfeiters, thieves, and NDA breaches. I took a deep breath. I picked up my phone, scrolled past my mother's contact, and found the international number for Maison Villette's New York legal department. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I prepared to lay the foundation for a masterpiece. The phone rang 3 times before it was answered. I wasn't calling a local police precinct, and I wasn't calling a family therapist. I was calling Sterling Hayes, the Senior Executive Counsel for Intellectual Property at Maison Villette. Sterling was not a man who dealt in emotions, apologies, or family dynamics. He was a corporate litigator whose entire professional existence was dedicated to protecting the multi-million-dollar assets of a global luxury brand. He was a shark who swam in the deep, cold waters of international copyright law. "Harper," Sterling's crisp, unhurried voice came through the receiver. "It's late. Tell me you aren't calling to say you want to alter the hemline on the bridal prototype. The tech packs are already finalized for Paris." "I'm not calling about a hemline, Sterling," I said, my voice completely stripped of panic, settling into a cold, clinical flatline. "I am calling to report a Level 1 security breach. The 7 prototypes for the debut collection have been physically stolen from my locked stockroom." There was a pause on the line. The casual late-night tone vanished instantly from Sterling's end, replaced by the terrifying, hyper-focused silence of a corporate assassin assessing a target. "Was it industrial?" Sterling asked sharply. "Did a rival house breach the biometric locks? Are the CAD files secure?" "The digital files are secure," I replied. "It wasn't corporate espionage, Sterling. It was my mother and my younger sister. My mother bypassed the building manager by exploiting an old guarantor lease. They took the physical garments to use as the bridal party wardrobe for my sister's wedding." I waited for Sterling to express sympathy, or perhaps disbelief at the sheer audacity of my family. He didn't. Sterling didn't care about my sister's wedding any more than a hurricane cares about a picnic. "Did you authorize the removal of the garments in any capacity?" he asked, his voice adopting the cadence of a formal deposition. "No." "Are they aware of the proprietary nature of the garments? Did you inform them of the NDA and the Maison Villette contract?" "I explicitly informed them," I said. My mother referred to the corporate contract as legal mumbo-jumbo and called the dresses just pieces of fabric. She stated she intends to keep them and have my sister wear the bridal prototype down the aisle in 3 weeks. A low, dark sound rumbled in Sterling's throat. It took me a second to realize he was laughing. It wasn't a humorous laugh. It was the sound a predator makes when the prey willingly walks into the center of the cage and locks the door from the inside. "Just pieces of fabric," Sterling repeated, tasting the sheer ignorance of the phrase. "Harper, the prototype your sister stole contains proprietary bias-cut architecture that we are currently securing international utility patents for. The materials alone are worth $30,000, and the intellectual property is valued at roughly $12 million. Your mother hasn't stolen a dress. She has committed grand larceny and felony intellectual property theft across state lines." "I know," I said. "What is our move? Do I call the local police?" "Absolutely not," Sterling commanded instantly. "If you call the local police, they will treat this as a domestic dispute. They will show up at your mother's house, write a report, and throw those multi-million-dollar prototypes into a dirty municipal evidence locker, where they will be stained, mishandled, and ruined. Furthermore, if we confront them now, they have 3 weeks to panic and destroy the garments to hide the evidence. We do not want to scare them. We want them to feel completely, arrogantly safe." "So, we let her keep them?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "We let her commit the crime," Sterling corrected smoothly. "We let her possess stolen corporate property. We let her organize her entire high society wedding around our intellectual property. And on the morning of the wedding, when the venue is paid for, the guests are arriving, and she is fully, irrevocably committed to the theft. We walk in and we repossess our assets. I am going to file an emergency federal ex parte injunction for the immediate seizure of stolen corporate property. I will have a federal judge sign it under seal, so your mother receives no advance notice. Sterling, I said softly, the cold knot in my chest finally beginning to loosen. They are going to try to alter them. Couture prototypes are not off-the-rack garments. They are built to the exact, unforgiving measurements of professional runway models, typically a size 0 or 2, standing 5'11". Serena was a beautiful girl, but she was a standard commercial size 4. She was shorter, curvier, and lacked the specific skeletal geometry the bridal gown was engineered to fit. If Serena tried to zip that dress, she would tear the French lace. To make it fit, she would have to take it to a tailor to have the seams let out, the hem chopped, and the intricate internal corsetry fundamentally altered. I anticipated that, Sterling said smoothly. I am dispatching a team of private corporate investigators to your city tomorrow morning. They will place your mother and sister under continuous surveillance. If they attempt to take those garments into any commercial tailoring establishment within a 50-mile radius, my team will step in. We will issue a preemptive legal warning to the tailor, informing them that altering the stolen garments will result in them being named as co-conspirators in a federal intellectual property lawsuit. They won't be able to get them tailored, I realized, a sharp, profound sense of architectural justice settling over me. No professional will touch those dresses once they see our corporate letterhead, Sterling promised. Your sister is going to have to resort to safety pins and double-sided fashion tape. Let her. Every pinhole she pushes into that silk is an added count of property destruction on the civil suit. Harper, you are to play the role of the defeated, submissive daughter. Ignore their calls. Do not argue with them. Let them believe they have won. Understood. I will fly in the night before the wedding, Sterling concluded. Get some sleep, Harper. Your family wanted a custom experience. Maison Villette is going to give them a fitting they will never forget. For the next 3 weeks, I executed Sterling's instructions with the flawless mechanical precision of a sewing machine. I ignored the flurry of text messages from my mother. She cycled through a bizarre mixture of patronizing sweetness and passive-aggressive guilt trips. Harper, the girls tried on the emerald gowns today. Simply stunning. I told you this was a better use for them than gathering dust in your studio. We saved so much money. It's a shame you are being so stubborn about this, Harper. Preston's family is so excited to see Serena's custom dress. You really should come to the wedding. We will save you a seat in the back. Silence is incredibly immature, Harper. Family is family. I didn't block her number. I needed the texts. Every message was a documented, time-stamped confession of possession. I simply screenshotted them and forwarded them to Sterling's legal team. Meanwhile, Sterling's private investigators were providing daily, highly detailed surveillance reports to my encrypted email. Exactly as I had predicted, Serena panicked when she realized the couture bridal gown wouldn't zip over her ribcage. The surveillance logs documented Evelyn and Serena carrying the opaque black garment bags into 3 different high-end bridal alteration boutiques in the city. In each instance, the scenario played out exactly as Sterling had orchestrated. Serena would carry the dress inside. 5 minutes later, a sharply dressed man in a dark suit, one of Sterling's corporate investigators, would walk into the boutique behind them. He would politely ask to speak to the owner, flash a badge, and hand them a manila folder containing a photograph of the Villette prototype and a formal, corporate legal warning. 10 minutes after that, Evelyn and Serena would storm out of the boutique, their faces flushed with rage, carrying the garment bags back to their SUV. No tailor in the city was willing to risk their business license and face a multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuit just to alter a dress for a local bride. Serena was trapped. She couldn't wear her original cheaper backup dress because she had already proudly announced to Preston's wealthy family that she was wearing a bespoke, unreleased couture gown. Her ego had nailed her to the stolen fabric. She was going to have to walk down the aisle in a multi-million-dollar prototype held together by sheer delusion and safety pins. The morning of the wedding arrived with bright, cloudless skies. The venue was an opulent, historic mansion located on a sprawling private estate an hour outside the city. Evelyn and Serena had blown nearly $80,000 on the venue and the imported floral arrangements alone. As I pulled my car through the wrought iron gates, I could see the massive white reception tent erected on the great lawn, dripping with thousands of white orchids. A string quartet was already setting up on the terrace. It was a breathtaking, incredibly expensive stage, and my mother and sister were about to perform a tragedy on it. I didn't park in the guest lot. I pulled my car up the secondary service driveway, parking behind a sleek black corporate SUV. I got out of my car. I wasn't wearing a bridesmaid dress. I wasn't wearing pastel chiffon or strappy heels. I wore a razor-sharp tailored black blazer, wide-leg trousers, and a pair of flat, pointed leather boots. I didn't look like a member of the bridal party. I looked like an auditor arriving to inspect a bankrupt firm. Standing beside the black SUV waiting for me was Sterling Hayes. He looked exactly how a corporate shark should look. Impeccably tailored navy suit, silver tie, and an expression of utter, chilling detachment. Standing behind him were two large men in tactical windbreakers. They weren't private investigators. They were off-duty federal marshals, hired by Maison Villette to execute the asset seizure. "Good morning, Harper," Sterling said, handing me a thick, plain manila folder. "Are we ready to review the collection?" I took the folder. The weight of it in my hands felt like absolute, unshakable gravity. "We are ready, Sterling." We walked through the side entrance of the mansion, bypassing the bustling catering staff and the florists rushing to arrange the final centerpieces. I knew exactly where the bridal suite was. Evelyn had sent me the wedding itinerary 2 weeks ago in a pathetic attempt to guilt me into attending. We climbed the grand, sweeping staircase to the second floor. The sounds of high-pitched laughter, popping champagne corks, and a hairdryer echoed down the long, carpeted hallway. We stopped outside the heavy oak double doors of the master bridal suite. I looked at Sterling. He gave me a single, crisp nod. I didn't knock. "You don't knock when you are repossessing your own property." I pushed the heavy oak doors open and stepped into the room, Sterling and the two marshals stepping in silently behind me. The bridal suite was a chaotic explosion of hairspray, half-empty mimosa flutes, and discarded makeup wipes. The 6 bridesmaids were gathered near the massive bay windows, taking selfies. They were wearing my emerald green evening gowns. My breath caught slightly in my throat. The gowns were stunning architectural masterpieces, but on these girls, they looked profoundly wrong. The hems were dragging on the floor. The bias-cut silk was pulling awkwardly across their hips because the dresses hadn't been properly fitted. They had butchered the drape of my work. In the center of the room, standing on a velvet pedestal in front of a massive 3-way antique mirror, was Serena. She was wearing the bridal prototype. My heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm as I looked at the dress. It was a masterpiece of hand-draped silk organza, featuring a structured, asymmetrical corset bodice that flowed into a cascading sculptural train. It was designed to look like spun glass, but as I looked closer, my professional eye caught the desecration. Because Serena was a size 4 and the dress was a 0, she couldn't close the back. Evelyn had clearly tried to force it. The delicate, invisible zipper was strained to the point of breaking. To keep the dress from falling off, Evelyn had literally used safety pins to secure the delicate silk organza to Serena's undergarments. She had folded the hem up and used cheap, double-sided fashion tape to keep Serena from tripping over the front. They had taken a $12 million masterpiece of couture architecture and taped it together like a high school home economics project. "Mom!" Serena whined, completely oblivious to our entrance, staring at her reflection in the mirror. "The back is pulling. It makes my waist look wide. Can't you just cut a slit in the corset so it breathes a little?" Evelyn, who was kneeling at Serena's feet with a mouthful of safety pins, sighed heavily. I am doing my best, Serena. If Harper hadn't been such a selfish, bitter little brat, she could have altered this properly. She always has to ruin everything. You shouldn't cut the corset, Serena, I said, my voice slicing through the chaotic noise of the room like a scalpel. The structural integrity of the garment relies on the steel boning. If you cut it, the entire bodice will collapse. The hairdryer switched off instantly. The bridesmaids froze, lowering their phones. Evelyn spun around on her knees, spitting the safety pins into her hand. When she saw me standing inside the door, her initial shock was quickly replaced by a smug, victorious smile. Harper! Evelyn stood up, brushing off her skirt. She didn't notice Sterling. She didn't notice the Marshals. She only saw her defeated daughter, crawling back to concede. Well, look who finally decided to show up. I told you, Serena, she couldn't stay away. You just missed the photographer, Harper, but you can help me pin the back of this dress. It's terribly tight. What are you wearing? Serena sneered, looking down at my sharp black suit from her velvet pedestal. You look like you're going to a funeral. You can't stand at the altar in that. If you're going to be a bridesmaid, you have to wear one of the green dresses. I am not here to be a bridesmaid, Serena, I said smoothly, stepping fully into the room. And I am not here to pin your dress. I raised the plain manila folder in my hand. I am here to audit the unauthorized use of my corporate assets. Evelyn frowned, finally looking past me and noticing the 3 large men in dark suits blocking the exit. The smugness on her face flickered, replaced by a sudden sharp edge of confusion. Harper, what is this? Evelyn demanded, taking a step forward. Who are these men? This is the bridal suite. You cannot bring security in here. Sterling stepped forward, smoothly bypassing me. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a thick, embossed business card and handed it to my mother. Good morning, Evelyn, Sterling said, his voice dripping with the kind of absolute, terrifying politeness that only corporate lawyers possess. My name is Sterling Hayes. I am the Senior Executive Counsel for Maison Villette, and these gentlemen are federal marshals. Evelyn stared at the card in her hand, the words Maison Villette meaning absolutely nothing to her. I don't care who you are. This is a private event. I rented this mansion. You need to leave immediately before I call the police. Oh, the police have already been notified, Evelyn, Sterling assured her, a cold, predatory smile touching the corners of his mouth. In fact, they are waiting at the bottom of the driveway. Sterling turned his gaze to Serena, who was clutching the silk organza of the dress, her eyes darting between me and the strangers in the room. Serena Ellis, Sterling announced, his voice ringing with absolute legal authority. You are currently wearing a proprietary, unreleased corporate prototype owned exclusively by Maison Villette Holdings LLC. The garment on your body is valued at roughly $12 million in intellectual property. You do not have the authorization to possess it, wear it, or photograph it. What is he talking about? Serena shrieked, looking at our mother. Mom, tell him to get out. My wedding is in 2 hours. I opened the manila folder. I slid the first document out and held it up. Mom, I said, entirely unbothered by Serena's screaming, when you broke into my locked stockroom and stole these garment bags, you didn't steal from me. You stole from a multi-billion-dollar luxury fashion house. These dresses are strictly protected under an international non-disclosure agreement. I dropped the paper onto the glass coffee table. That, I continued, is a federal ex parte injunction, signed by a judge at 8 a.m. this morning. It authorizes the immediate physical seizure of all 7 stolen prototypes. It also serves as a formal cease and desist, barring you from photographing, posting, or publicly displaying the garments. Evelyn stared at the paper on the table, the color finally draining from her face as the reality of the words federal injunction and Marshals began to penetrate her arrogance. Harper, you are being ridiculous, Evelyn shouted, her voice trembling with the first notes of genuine panic. This is family. You made these dresses. Tell this man to call off his goons. We are keeping the dresses for the ceremony, and we will bring them back to your little studio tomorrow, I promise. You aren't keeping them for the next 10 seconds, Evelyn. Sterling corrected her sharply. He gestured to the two marshals. The marshals stepped fully into the room. Ladies, Sterling addressed the 6 terrified bridesmaids, who were huddled by the window in the emerald green gowns. You have exactly 5 minutes to step into the adjoining bathroom, remove the stolen corporate property, and hand the garments to my security team. If you fail to comply, you will be named as co-conspirators in a federal grand larceny indictment, and you will be arrested in this suite. The bridesmaids didn't hesitate. They didn't look at Serena. They didn't look at Evelyn. They practically trampled each other running toward the ensuite bathroom, desperately pulling the zippers down on the green silk before the door even closed behind them. Serena let out a horrified, strangled sob. Mom, they are taking the bridesmaids' dresses. My pictures are going to be ruined. The bridesmaids are the least of your concerns, Serena, I said, walking toward the velvet pedestal. I stopped inches from the hem of the multi-million-dollar dress. I looked down at the cheap double-sided tape Evelyn had stuck to the pristine silk. I looked up at my sister, whose face was streaked with running mascara, her perfect aesthetic crumbling into absolute, devastating reality. Take the dress off, Serena, I said softly. No! Serena screamed, clutching her arms across her chest, backing away from me until she hit the 3-way mirror. No, I am the bride. Preston's family is downstairs. 300 people are downstairs. I don't have another dress. You cannot do this to me. I am not doing anything to you, Serena, I replied, my voice as calm and steady as a heartbeat. I am simply repossessing the architecture you tried to steal. You have 2 choices. You can step into that bathroom, take the dress off, and hand it to me. Or, the federal marshals will arrest you for felony grand larceny, place you in handcuffs, and walk you through your own cocktail hour in front of Preston's entire family. I stepped back, leaving the empty space between us. The choice is yours, I said, but the dress leaves this room with me. The bridal suite was so silent you could hear the faint, desperate ticking of Evelyn's expensive wristwatch. Serena stood on the velvet pedestal, staring at me through the 3-way mirror. For her entire life, Serena had operated on the assumption that if she cried hard enough, threw a loud enough tantrum, or looked pretty enough while doing it, the world would eventually bend to accommodate her. She was waiting for the world to bend. But federal law does not bend for tears, and corporate litigators do not care about your floral arrangements. Mom, Serena whimpered, her voice dropping into the high-pitched, helpless tone of a terrified child. Mom, do something. Write him a check. Pay for the dress. Just pay him. Evelyn, snapping out of her frozen shock, lunged for her designer handbag sitting on the vanity. She pulled out her checkbook with trembling hands. Fine, Evelyn snapped, glaring at Sterling with a mixture of hatred and profound arrogance. You want money? Is that what this is about, Harper? You're trying to extort your own family for a commission? Fine. Mr. Hayes, how much is the dress? I will write you a check right now, and you will leave my daughter alone. Sterling didn't even blink. He looked at Evelyn's checkbook the way a person might look at a child offering a handful of Monopoly money to buy a real house. Evelyn, Sterling said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. Maison Villette is a multi-billion-dollar luxury conglomerate. We do not sell our unreleased prototypes. However, if you are asking for the valuation of the intellectual property currently wrapped around your daughter's waist, the minimum baseline is $12 million. Does your checking account cover that? Evelyn's pen hovered over the paper, the color completely washed out of her face. 12 million? For a dress? You are insane. That is a lie. It is an internationally insured corporate asset, Sterling corrected her smoothly. And every second it remains on her body, you are accruing liability. Put the checkbook away, Evelyn. You cannot afford this room. The bathroom door clicked open. One by one, the 6 bridesmaids filed out. They were wearing their street clothes, sweatpants, jeans, oversized t-shirts. They looked completely humiliated. The first bridesmaid, a girl I recognized from Serena's college sorority, silently handed a pile of 6 opaque black garment bags to one of the federal marshals. The marshal unzipped each bag just enough to verify the emerald green silk was inside, then nodded to Sterling. 6 accounted for, Sterling said. He turned his chilling gaze back to Serena. We are waiting on the 7th. Marshal, if she does not step into the bathroom in the next 10 seconds, you are authorized to effect an arrest. The marshal took a single heavy step forward. His hand rested casually on his utility belt. Serena broke. She let out a loud, visceral sob, her perfectly contoured face crumpling into absolute despair. She didn't say another word to me. She didn't look at our mother. She grabbed the heavy silk train of the $12 million gown, stepped off the velvet pedestal, and ran into the adjoining master bathroom, slamming the door behind her. Evelyn stood in the center of the room, completely paralyzed. The grand, orchestrated illusion of her high society triumph was collapsing in real time, and she had absolutely no one to blame but herself. "Harper," Evelyn whispered, her voice cracking. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pathetic pleading. She reached out toward me. "Harper, please. Preston's family is downstairs. The string quartet is playing. What is she supposed to wear? You can't leave her with nothing. You're a designer. Make something work. Give her one of the green dresses. Give her anything." I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life treating my passion as a joke, who had treated my boundaries as a challenge, and who had broken into my sanctuary to steal my future. "I am not a designer today, Mom," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a heartbeat. "I am an auditor, and my inventory is closed. I told you 3 weeks ago that fabric is not a dress, and my business is not a charity for your social climbing. You blew your budget on orchids. I suggest you ask the florist to weave her a skirt." The bathroom door cracked open. A single, trembling hand reached out, holding the heavy, opaque black garment bag. I stepped forward and took it from Serena. I didn't just tuck it under my arm. I am a professional. I unzipped the bag right there in the bridal suite, slipping on a pair of white cotton inspection gloves I had brought in my blazer pocket. I carefully pulled the bodice of the bridal prototype out into the light. I inspected the damage with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. I saw the stretched, frayed teeth of the invisible zipper where Evelyn had tried to force it closed over Serena's ribcage. I saw the cheap, sticky residue of the double-sided fashion tape clinging to the delicate silk organza hem. But worst of all, I saw the pinholes. Evelyn had driven safety pins directly through the structural seams of the bodice to hold it to Serena's undergarments. The thick metal pins had severed the microscopic fibers of the French lace. "Sterling," I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. "The structural integrity of the bodice has been compromised. I am counting 12 distinct puncture wounds through the chantilly lace overlay. The bias hem is damaged with adhesive residue. The zipper track is destroyed." Sterling stepped up beside me, peering at the dress. He pulled a small notebook from his breast pocket and clicked a silver pen. "Documented," Sterling said smoothly. "For the record, Evelyn, the civil damages for the physical destruction of a proprietary couture prototype start at roughly $250,000, exclusive of legal fees. Maison Villette will be serving you with the lawsuit by the end of the week. I highly recommend you retain counsel." Evelyn staggered backward, literally falling into a plush armchair by the window. She buried her face in her hands, letting out a low, mourning wail. I zipped the garment bag closed. I didn't feel a shred of pity. When you take a sledgehammer to a load-bearing wall, you do not get to cry when the roof collapses on your head. "The inventory is secured," Sterling announced to the marshals. "We are leaving." I turned my back on my mother. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't offer a parting insult. Silence is the heaviest thing you can leave in a room full of people who thrive on drama. Sterling, the Marshals, and I walked out of the bridal suite, the heavy oak doors closing with a definitive, final click behind us. We walked down the grand, sweeping staircase. Through the massive foyer windows, I could see the wedding guests taking their seats on the pristine white folding chairs arranged on the great lawn. Women in expensive pastel dresses and men in sharp suits were murmuring excitedly, waiting for the grand entrance of the bride. The string quartet was playing a beautiful, sweeping classical piece. It was a picture-perfect wedding, except for the minor detail that the bride was currently sitting on a bathroom floor in her underwear, crying over a dress she couldn't steal. We walked out the side entrance, got into the sleek black corporate SUV, and drove away from the mansion before the first note of the bridal march could even begin. I later learned exactly how the rest of the afternoon unfolded, courtesy of a furious, multi-page email Evelyn sent me a week later. There was no wedding. When it became clear that Serena could not walk down the aisle, because she literally had no dress, and the bridesmaids refused to walk down in their sweatpants, Evelyn was forced to go downstairs and face the crowd. She had to stand at the altar, in front of 300 wealthy, judgmental guests, and announce that the wedding was postponed due to a sudden wardrobe emergency. Preston's mother, an icy matriarch of old money, demanded an explanation. When the bridesmaids, who were terrified of the federal marshals, quietly leaked the truth to the groom's party, that Serena had stolen a multi-million-dollar corporate asset and had been raided by federal law enforcement minutes before the ceremony, the groom's family was horrified. Old money does not tolerate public criminal humiliation. Preston called off the engagement the very next morning. The financial and social fallout for Evelyn and Serena was absolute. Because Serena canceled the wedding on the day of the event, every single vendor contract defaulted. The historic mansion, the catering company, the florist, the 10-piece orchestra, none of it was refundable. Evelyn and Serena were on the hook for $80,000 of debt expenses, but that was just the beginning. True to his word, Sterling Hayes did not show mercy. Maison Villette filed a massive civil suit against Evelyn and Serena for intellectual property theft, corporate trespassing, and the physical destruction of the couture prototype. Evelyn tried to hire a flashy defense attorney to fight the fashion house, claiming it was just a family dispute. The judge nearly laughed her lawyer out of the courtroom. The evidence was irrefutable. We had the building manager's testimony that Evelyn lied to get into the loft. We had the surveillance photos of them carrying the Villette garment bags into local tailors. We had Serena's own handwritten, embossed note confessing to taking the dresses. To avoid the matter escalating into criminal grand larceny charges that would have put them both in federal prison, Evelyn was forced to settle out of court. The settlement completely bankrupted her. She had to sell her suburban house and liquidate her retirement accounts just to pay Maison Villette the $250,000 in physical damages and legal fees. Serena, who had built her entire social media brand around being a wealthy, sophisticated socialite, became a pariah. The story of the stolen couture wedding leaked to the local high society blogs. She lost all of her brand sponsorships. She was uninvited from every gala and luncheon. She ended up having to move into a tiny, cramped apartment with Evelyn, working a retail job at a mid-tier department store to help pay off their remaining debts. They had tried to steal my fabric to make themselves look rich. Instead, they had stripped themselves bare for the entire world to see. I never spoke to them again. I didn't need to. I had let my boundaries do the talking, and my boundaries spoke with the full weight of federal copyright law. In September, 4 months after the disastrous non-wedding, I was in New York City. It was the opening night of New York Bridal Fashion Week. The venue was a sleek, minimalist warehouse in Chelsea, packed with international fashion buyers, magazine editors, and industry critics. The lights dimmed. The heavy bass of the runway music began to pulse through the floorboards. I stood backstage, my heart hammering a chaotic, beautiful rhythm against my ribs. My debut collection for Maison Villette walked down the runway. The 6 architectural evening gowns, the ones the bridesmaids had almost ruined, flowed down the catwalk flawlessly, the deep emerald and slate gray silk catching the spotlights like liquid metal. And then came the finale, the bridal prototype. I had spent 3 weeks in the New York atelier, working tirelessly with Maison Villette's master seamstresses to repair the damage Evelyn had done. We couldn't just sew the pinholes closed. The delicate French lace was too fragile. So, I redesigned it. I used the damaged seams as an opportunity to introduce a new avant-garde element. I wove incredibly delicate silver-threaded embroidery over the puncture wounds, creating a subtle, shimmering pattern that looked like frost crawling up the bodice. The damage didn't ruin the dress. It forced me to make it a masterpiece. When the model walked out onto the runway, the room went completely silent. The dress floated. It was structural perfection. The silver embroidery caught the flashes of 100 cameras, turning the scars into a feature of absolute, defiant beauty. When the show ended, the crowd gave the collection a standing ovation. I walked out onto the runway to take my bow. I didn't look like a quiet, lonely seamstress. I wore a tailored white suit. I looked at the sea of applauding industry titans, and I felt a profound, unshakable sense of peace. People ask me sometimes if I regret calling the corporate lawyers on my own mother and sister. They ask if a dress was really worth destroying my family. I always give them the same answer. I didn't destroy my family over a dress. My family destroyed themselves over an illusion. They believed that because I was quiet, because I worked with my hands, and because I didn't engage in their screaming matches, I was weak. They mistook my patience for permission, but anyone who works in bespoke tailoring knows the truth about tension. You can pull on a seam for a very long time. You can stretch the fabric. You can test the thread, and it might hold. But the moment you take a pair of shears to the foundation, the entire garment unravels. My mother and sister brought shears to my boundaries. They expected the fabric to fall apart. They didn't realize I had reinforced the seams with steel. I live in New York full-time now. My career at Maison Villette has grown exponentially. I spend my days sketching, draping, and building garments that defy gravity. I am surrounded by colleagues who respect my talent, who honor my time, and who understand that true value is built stitch by stitch, not stolen in the dark. I don't miss my mother. I don't miss my sister. My life is entirely, peacefully my own. That is my story. 7 stolen dresses, 1 federal injunction, and the moment a family of social climbers realized they had tried to steal from the wrong designer. If you have ever been the person whose talent is treated as a free resource, whose boundaries are ignored, and whose passion is belittled by the people who are supposed to support you, take this as your sign. Stop trying to alter yourself to fit their measurements. Secure your stockroom, protect your intellectual property, and let the corporate lawyers handle the rest. You do not owe your masterpiece to anyone who refuses to pay the price of admission. Thank you for being here, and thank you for reading my story. If this reminded you to enforce your boundaries and protect your work, share this with someone who needs the strength to hold their ground. Drop a comment below with the word couture to let me know you stayed until the end. Hit that subscribe button for more true stories about quiet victories, and I will see you in the next one.